Maybe Coach knows something about it. I remember there was a football team back in, I think, in the World Football League, Chicago Fire, wasn't there, Coach Ellis Johnson? You remember that back in the day?
Yes, sir.
Sure, so there was.
Stallions, that league, pretty good league if they just could have remained solvent financially and kept it reasonable.
Yeah, there you go. So that's the only Chicago Fire we're familiar with. I tell you what, it got hot inside that Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday afternoon, Coach. I was there, and I got to tell you, we broke it down last week, and knew Georgia was a good football team. Thought Alabama would win the game, and ultimately the Tide did. But I think the thing that impressed me the most about Georgia, and I'm curious as to your thoughts, if you agree, was the way they played the game from the standpoint of you could see this wasn't a football team that was hoping to win or wanting to make a good showing or just wanting to gain respect. They expected to win the football game. They thought they had the better football team. I'm not sure. They still don't think they have the better football team, and they really took it to Alabama. But give the Tide credit, they found a way to win the game. But a really impressive performance by Georgia, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, they may have had the most talented team, which I don't have a clue. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. They certainly didn't have the better football team because they lost the game. When you play a game, it just seems like, they edged Alabama in just about every little thing you could look at from a statistical standpoint. But Alabama knows how to play in a situation. In other words, when they're in front, they're not front runners, and they're not guys who get down when they're down. Even when things don't look like they're real pretty for them, they're still focused on the next play. And when the game's over, they're going to make more plays in critical situations than the opponent in most games because they've been there so many times, and the players have been in those situations, and I think they've probably been coached that way. So although there were things that weren't going their way, the ball game never got close to being out of control. It was always a hard-fought game, even when it was a 14-point difference.
Coach, we've not seen until that game Tua Tagovailoa struggle. And I know some of it had to do, he aggravated that ankle that first series. And, of course, later when Jonah Williams fell on his foot, he had to come out of the game. But in addition to that, and as Kirby Smart said afterwards, doesn't matter who the quarterback is. You affect the quarterback. You put pressure on him. You hit him. You can make it tough on him. What did you see from Tua in that game through the 2 picks? Could have easily had a third. He'd had 2 the entire season coming in. What did you see from him in that game or see from Georgia defensively that gave him so much trouble, unlike anybody else that he played against this season?
Well, I think the difference is that Georgia's got more team speed. They probably had an excellent plan. I think sometimes that part is overrated unless you're just not executing your plan. But when you cut the amount of time by just fractions of a second or by a second or two on how long you've got back there to make decisions, and Georgia did, and when you don't have the escape routes that you can get out and start running around, making the downfield throws on scramble routes, which are impossible to cover sometimes, those were cut off, much better than other teams have allowed. So the game got a little more testy for him, and it wasn't good. And I know he was limited, that you could tell. I mean, he must be a tough kid. He was fighting through a leg injury, and I think it was the opposite foot that got stepped on.
Right,
wasn't it?
It was.
Yes, I mean, you got a plant foot, you've got a post foot, or leg or knee. I mean, you got things that are bothering your ability to scramble and get loose. You got things that are bothering your throwing motion, possibly your fundamentals in throwing the football from the pocket. So he obviously wasn't full speed physically, but I think he's been making some real daring decisions through the early part of the year, and he's good enough, and his supporting cast is good enough that he was able to really burn a lot of teams who are really good, but not quite as good as Georgia. And I think maybe he forced some decisions in that game that he's going to have to stop doing because they're getting now to these other teams in this playoff. You're not going to get 5 chances and be good on 3 of them and win the game. You're going to turn the ball over too many times if we don't start making better decisions.
That's right. Coach Ellis Johnson with us on the Bud Light Hotline powered by Adams Beverages, talking about the SEC championship game. Of course, Tua came in at halftime in the national championship game against Georgia and led Alabama to a comeback victory. This time it's Jalen Hurts coming in, 28-21. Tua goes out. He comes in mid-drive, leads him to the touchdown with a beautiful throw. Had a number of beautiful throws. He was 5 for 5 on third downs in the game, but hit Jerry Jeudy on a I think a 3rd and goal from around the 10-yard line. And then, of course, after Georgia went for the fake punt, he let him down for the winning touchdown. Amazing performance by Jalen Hurts coming in cold and playing as good a football maybe as he's played in his entire career.
Yeah. You said he was 5 for 5 on third down.
He was.
That means the other one was 0 for 6 on third
That's
down.
right.
They were 5 for 11 when the game was over.
That's exactly right. Tua was 0 for 6 on third, and Jalen was 5 for 5.
That's right. Now, there's 10 other players out there, so it's not always one person's fault. But at the same time, what a tremendous performance for him, because, obviously we don't need to get into all the frustrating situations, losing your job and going back and forth. But, I mean, a guy comes in stone cold and just does a great job. He doesn't make too flashy plays. He makes a really, really good game out of a game that gets shaky, and led the team to some critical scores and first downs and so forth. He played really well, and he played more like a quarterback who can throw the ball than what people had been expecting from him in the past. They didn't start running him every other down. He operated the offense. It looked like he was running a game plan that was put in for Tua, and he executed it better. So what a luxury. I mean, if you're on Georgia's side, you're playing such great defense, you're stopping one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, and all of a sudden he gets hurt and can't play, and they bring one in that's almost just as good, and he wins the ball game.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. If you're Kirby Smart, you got to be pulling your hair out. I want to ask you what you thought of the fake punt. And granted, after something doesn't work, it's easy to second guess it. That Kirby defended it after the game. It was 28-28, about 5 minutes to go in the game. Georgia was at midfield. Kirby said, going back to his time on the staff at Alabama was in the punt safe, meaning they kept the defense out there. But he said they have never changed that. Rick had actually faked one against them in the SEC championship game a few years earlier. He said in that particular situation, they leave a guy uncovered. This time it was Swift. He said he was uncovered. He said at the final second, they jumped somebody on him. Of course, I would say, it was 11 yards to go. It wasn't like it was 4 or 5. You bring in Fields, who hadn't been in a punt situation all year. I thought it was an easy play to defend for Alabama, but he defended it. What did you think of it?
Well, I just felt like with the length they had to go, where the ball was located on the field, the score, the time, I don't think it was necessary. Now, you've already mentioned several important factors, and Kirby having the knowledge of what they're going to run, and that's just like having an offensive play. If you know what the other team is in defensively, and you check to the play that you want, and you got a chance to be successful, and then more of a chance than not. But I didn't think it was necessary. Now, he may have had a better feel for his team and the game at that time, feeling like the momentum was slipping a little bit. Had he punted the ball and put them down there, if he felt like they were losing a little bit of control there, and Alabama, if they didn't give them the ball back, there's going to be a way to put them to bed. Sometimes that's the reason coaches do things like that, is they feel like that the game is shifting on them a little bit, and they just want to cut the water off. But it's easy to second-guess him. But he's already explained the basic reasons why he felt good about it, and I think it makes sense. I just didn't feel like at that time, with the score and the location, the amount of time, and all of that, I just felt like it wasn't necessary. Let your players win the game. So far, they're playing really well, and I just think it's been a lot better situation to give up possession and deep field position there.
So Alabama survives and gets to 13-0, gets the number 1 seed in the college football playoff, will take on Oklahoma. Oklahoma got that 4 seed ahead of Ohio State, ahead of Georgia. The Orange Bowl, December 29th in Miami. Break down this Alabama-Oklahoma matchup for us. I mean, obviously the Sooners' offense is elite and can score a lot of points. Defensively, they've had issues. Interesting game. How do you see it playing out?
I just think it's going to come down to how much Alabama's defense can make stops on Oklahoma, because I don't how many stops Oklahoma can make on Alabama's offense, because they've not had an effective defensive game against anybody this all year, other than they come up with some critical plays somewhere in the game that gives OU a better, one more possession than the other team. And I thought, like, for example, the corner blitz the other day, Ruffin did a super job having pulled the right lever at the right time and got that safety. When you do something like that, you got an offense like Oklahoma. Sometimes you don't need much more than that. But it's going to be, I think, hard for them to consistently stop Alabama. I really do think Alabama, although it's really good on the defense and they got good cover guys downfield, if they let Oklahoma have too many plays on offense, they get a little tired, pass rush starts to slow down a little bit. I wouldn't want to give Oklahoma too many possessions. So maybe it's a game where Alabama's got to have a tremendous game rushing the ball and not so many of the shot balls, just other than to get people out of the box. But I would go into the game thinking I don't want Oklahoma to have the ball too many shots.
Kyler Murray, Dwayne Haskins, Tua Tagovailoa finalists for the Heisman on Saturday night in New York City, Coach. It seemed like a foregone conclusion a few weeks ago that Tua was going to win this thing and become Alabama's first Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. But with the way the season ended, especially with the way he struggled on Saturday against Georgia and the fact that the ballots weren't due in until Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock, you think Murray's going to wind up, I don't say stealing this thing away, but Murray wind up winning this thing over Tua?
I have no feel for it. I don't mean to diminish the trophy or the award, but the voting process on this thing is it's just not good. It may have been back in the 40s and the 50s, but with all the TV, all the social media, now you got the playoffs. It's not teams playing through a regular season, pick the best player, and then 12 teams go play in 6 bowls that don't mean anything in the polls. They're giving this award out before some of the most critical games in the season are played. And when a player like these 2 quarterbacks you're mentioning, of course, Haskins is playing for one that almost got in, their teams are in the national championship playoff. So how they play in those games, I think, is one of the biggest indicators of whether they're a Heisman or not. And we won't know that, and we don't know that. And some of the ballots, in my understanding, I could be wrong on this, yes, there is a deadline for when you send them in. But you can send them in at any time before then.
Right.
And there are people, I would guarantee you there are people who voted way before last weekend, much less these next critical games. So I wouldn't begin to be able to tell you who's going to win it. If either one of those 2 guys got it, it'd be hard to argue anything about them not being deserving. But if either one of those guys don't get it, it'd certainly be an argument to say they deserved it. But we'll see. I just think it's the way the voting process is done, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Other semifinal, Clemson and Notre Dame at the Cotton Bowl at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. Notre Dame held on to that 3rd spot. I thought there was a chance Oklahoma might jump them, having beaten Texas, to get a little revenge there. But it's Notre Dame and Clemson. How do you see that game?
I don't think there's any question. Most talented teams in the nation right now, the 4 best, are not in the playoffs. Georgia should be in the playoffs if you go by that. But I think that Notre Dame's gone undefeated. Georgia's lost 2 games. One that was soundly defeated, shut out, I think, I can't even remember, but they were soundly defeated by LSU, almost 20 points. But anyhow, that's one of your conference opponents. They had a game the other day they couldn't close. So it's not, you can't complain too much, but I really don't think the best 4 teams, well, I shouldn't use the word best. I just corrected you a while ago. I don't think the 4 most talented teams that could win, that have a chance to win the thing, are in it. Now, Notre Dame may surprise us all, but I think the team that came out with rose-colored glasses on this whole thing is Clemson, because if Georgia upset Alabama, the seeding would have changed. And I think both of those teams would have been in the playoffs, and the road to the final would have been harder. Now, Notre Dame may surprise us all. They may be the most sound, most balanced, most, may play the best through the pressure situations. Who knows? But I just think they're the least explosive team, and I think they're the least tested team. One of them, either Clemson or Notre Dame's played the weaker schedules. And I just don't have a good feel. I haven't seen Notre Dame play much this year. But, I think it's going to be a tough game for Clemson, but they're not a team that's explosive like Clemson.
I want to ask you about some of these other bowl matchups because there are some good ones. Let's start with Georgia and Texas in the Sugar Bowl. Of course, Georgia is not where they want to be. How do you overcome the disappointment like they experienced on Saturday and then get your team up and ready to go and excited about playing in it's a big bowl game, but it's not the playoff? How do you think Kirby Smart will approach that with his team?
It is hard, and it's not hard on game day or the day before game day. I mean, players get the butterflies and the edgy and the excitement. It all comes back when it's game time. But the problem now is these first 6 days of practice. Are they really going to be focused in? Are they practicing with a little intensity? Are they practicing with a purpose? Are they really on top of the game plan, trying to absorb it, and know all the little details and all this kind of thing? If you go down, go through kind of sleepwalk the first week of practice, head home for a couple of days of Christmas, come back with 3 days to polish up, and you haven't really put the money in the bank before you go home, that's when you come out with a poor performance. And I think it really is hard because they probably feel like they're as good as any of those teams in the championship playoff, and on any given day they are. But the fact of the matter is they miss a chance. And you're going to have tremendous, of course, obviously coaches have to do a great job of leadership. You're going to have tremendous team leadership among the players to have good preparation. Then you'll have a good bowl game. It's not going to be the pregame locker room talk or, the opening kickoff that's going to win the game. It's going to be whether the team's got up off the mat, put it behind them, and started preparing themselves well for another big game.
Coach Ellis Johnson with us for his weekly segment. Another really interesting bowl game, the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Florida taking on Michigan. Dan Mullen's team is kind of on the move, while Michigan had such high hopes going into that Ohio State game, a little bit like Georgia from the standpoint that they were eyeing the college football playoff, and now they're in a bowl game. But this will be one of those games that people will watch for SEC versus Big Ten purposes. And this is a game, boy. This one could be a really, really good one, in my opinion.
I think you're right. Now, Michigan's challenge is going to be what we just got through talking about. They're going to have the letdown of having their own destiny and control, and they let it slip away. So they're going to have, the difficulty of trying to get excited about this game. Florida, on the other hand, as you say, has not probably had as good a season over the long haul, but the last several weeks they've really been kind of finding out who they are. It seems like they're kind of coming together, playing, executing, and doing some things a little bit better, so forth. I think it could be a really good game, and very different teams. Michigan's defense statistically was tremendous coming into the Ohio State game, but Coach Don Brown's done a tremendous job with his system, and Ohio State exposed a lack of talent on that side of the ball. And I was surprised myself. We saw them in the bowl game last year, and I didn't notice that they were not that talented on defense. But, boy, their team speed, Ohio State was clearly better or more talented. And so that's what's been carrying them all year. And if Florida is able to move the ball at least half as well as Michigan was, at least half as well as Ohio State was on Michigan, Florida will win the ball game. It's just going to be determined whether Michigan's defense bounces back and is able to keep Florida off the board.
This game between LSU and Central Florida in the Fiesta Bowl. All right, Central Florida's not lost a game in 2 years. They beat Auburn last year in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. I know LSU's going to have some guys that aren't going to play as they get ready for the NFL draft, but it doesn't matter. If Central Florida wins this game, you know what's going to happen, Coach. I mean, and rightfully so. I mean, the screams of inequality are going to get louder in terms of Central Florida being left out of these conversations as far as the playoff and so forth. If this is a game that the Knights are able to win for the second straight year over a top-tier SEC team, they're going to – at some point, people are going to have to listen to them. Now, LSU may go in there and just wipe the field with them. I don't know. But this is a big game for Central Florida. If they can do it 2 years in a row, it's going to be more and more difficult for the Power Fives to turn their nose up at Central Florida, don't you think?
Well, yeah, at Central Florida, but I think more or less in some ways when you put it the playoff concept, I think this is more about Central Florida representing the non-Power Five. And the thing about it, LSU had a good, solid season. Their SEC team, short of a quarterback, dynamic quarterback and high-scoring offense, might be in that Final Four. Central Florida deserves a tremendous amount of credit for losing their quarterback and still being able to win that final championship game they had. I do think they've lost something now, though, without their starting quarterback. I think they'll have a hard time beating LSU. But if you say a few guys are going to maybe go ahead and stay out for the NFL draft, you got a letdown there. We're playing a non-Power 5 team in a bowl game. We thought we'd be over here, but no, we're over there. There's some other factors to get into it. If both teams come well prepared, excited, and both teams have a really good effort, a good game, I think LSU beats them. I don't think it'll be extremely bad, but I think they'll beat them with a little bit of convincing performance. But even if Central Florida wins, I don't think the fact that LSU is not a premier LSU team, I don't see anything changing on selection playoffs unless and until they go to 8 teams. And then they would have enough room where they would include an undefeated best of the rest, would possibly have a chance to get in there. But as long as there's 4 teams, nobody's getting in unless they're a Power 5 team. I can't imagine it.
Ask you about a couple more games before we turn you loose. Auburn going to get an opportunity to play in the Music City Bowl against a good Purdue team. And Gus Malzahn's 1-4 in bowl games. Had to fight to keep his job. Is going to keep it looks like, but ended the season poorly after the way it went off the rails last year after they were, one win away from getting into the playoff. Normally these lower tier bowls, you don't pay that much attention to them, but how big is this one for Gus Malzahn and Auburn to try to build a little momentum going into next season, do you think?
I think it's big. I don't know about building momentum the next season. I think if they get beat, the drum beat's going to continue, the complaining and all that. It's just part of it now, but I think it's going to affect recruiting. When it affects recruiting, it affects next season. It affects the next season, and it affects the third season. So I think that the problem is they have a lackluster finish against a team that's not obviously even barely in the top half of the Big Ten. It just starts to put a picture of your program, and you lose a little bit of the attractiveness of some of the top players that you're after in recruiting. I did not realize it was 1-4 in bowl games, but this season's almost been the opposite of last season. They had a time where they dipped about the fourth week there, but they came back and beat Georgia and Alabama back-to-back, got in the championship game. This year it tailed off at the end, probably lost like 2 or 3 of the last 5. And right now they're struggling because they're not really playing as well offensively as they expected. And defense, I think, has been tired, been over too many snaps every game. They start to have things break down because of fatigue and because of the number of snaps. People have a chance to throw more darts at you, see what you're doing on defense, figure out what your plan is, and start attacking it. So I do think it's a very important game. I don't know how good Purdue is on defense. Haven't seen it, but I think the way Auburn wins this game, if they win it, they're going to have to run the football. They've got to stay on the field a little bit, keep the defense from having to play 80, 85 snaps. Purdue's been a team that has explosive plays and they've really been impressive on offense some games. And they've had 2 really, really huge wins this year. They just hadn't had a complete season. But, this one's an important one for Auburn.
Lastly, Coach, the South Carolina program, of course, you're very close to it. Had a great year last year. Not quite as good a year this year. Dealt with some injuries. But you know what? They got themselves bowl eligible for the second straight year and going to play a really good Virginia team in the Belk Bowl. Bentley put up some gigantic numbers against Clemson. Will Muschamp's bringing this program along. I know it would be a nice little cap on the season for them if they could get a win over a quality Virginia team.
Yes, they definitely do. Me too. It's been a season. It kind of depends on the way you judge it. Will's going to take them to a bowl game for 3 years in a row. I don't think any other head coach ever been hired at South Carolina was able to do that.
Wow.
Even Coach Spurrier, I think the third year did not get into a bowl. But when you go back and look at the season, they only beat one team in the 1A level that has a winning record, and that was Missouri. And other than that, they beat a 500 Vandy. They beat Tennessee and Ole Miss, who had losing seasons. They beat Akron and Coastal Carolina, who are just very average mid-level 1As, and they beat Chattanooga. So there's only one quality win, real quality win on the schedule. Injuries just decimated them. At one point in time, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they had 5 DBs out, and all of them were legitimately safeties. And it's just something that's almost impossible to overcome. I think in some ways they did the best coaching job they've done since they've been here. But at the same time, this football team was never a team even playing in the top half of the SEC. And they're going to have to stay healthy. I don't know how you do that other than that's good luck. And they're going to have to continue to recruit, and they'll be fine. Because I think Will's done a really good job. He's got a great staff. They do a super job of coaching. Right now, they're not playing with premier SEC talent. And some of them that they do have are not on the field. They're sitting in the tub. So until that factor, that injury factor, gives them a chance to play with the best roster, that's the way it's going to be. But I think this would be an important bowl win for them, give them 8 wins. I don't know whether sometimes there's a lot of difference, 8 wins, 7 wins. So it is a big game for them, and hopefully they'll go up and have a great preparation. And Charlotte notoriously has bad weather for that game, so hopefully that won't happen too.
Great stuff as always, Coach. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Good to be with you.